Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming out today. We've got 4 leaders here today of conscience and principle. The format will be Dr. Paul is going to speak for about 5 minutes and explain why we're here. Then each of our candidates will speak for a couple of minutes and share their remarks. And then finally, we will have time for questions at the end. Thank you very much. With no further ado, Dr. Ron Paul.
Thank you very much for coming. I consider this press conference very important. I'm very pleased that we have some special guests here. We have 3 of the candidates here with me. Cynthia McCain, Chuck Baldwin, and Ralph Nader. And I understand Bob Barr is on his way, or will be here shortly. I want to start off by stating that we come together here in unity, in spite of the disagreements that some of the candidates have on some of the points. There's some points that bring them together. The process brings them together, as well as the principles that we find very, very important that we're following in this country. And we've drawn up a set of principles, and the 4 candidates have agreed to these principles. And I want to read those, so that really gives you the thrust of what we're doing here today. But let me start by what these principles are. It says, we agree. Foreign policy. The Iraq War must end as quickly as possible with removal of all our troops from the region. We must initiate the return of our troops from around the world, including Korea, Japan, Europe, and the entire Middle East. Make a suggestion. This is not so much as a rally. I know you support some of these people, but we want to run it as a press conference. So sort of hold back a little bit on that, and then when the questions come, the questions will come from the press. We must cease the war propaganda, threats of a blockade, and plans for attack on Iran. Nor should we reignite the Cold War over Georgia. We must have a willingness to talk to all countries and offer friendship and trade and travel to all who are willing. We must take off the table the threat of a nuclear first strike against all nations. Privacy issue. We must insist on protecting the privacy and civil liberties of all persons under U.S. jurisdiction. We must repeal or radically change the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, and the FISA legislation. We must reject the notion of torture, elimination of habeas corpus, secret tribunals, and secret prisons. We must insist on no immunity for corporations that spy willingly on the people for the benefit of the government. We must reject the unitary president, the illegal use of signing statements, and excessive use of executive orders. The national debt. We believe that there should be no increase in the national debt. The burden of debt placed on the next generation is unjust and already threatening our economy and the value of our dollar. We must pay our bills as we go along and not unfairly place this burden on a future generation. The Federal Reserve. We insist that there be a thorough investigation, evaluation, and audit of the Federal Reserve System and its cozy relationship with the banking, corporate, financial institution. The arbitrary power to create money and credit out of thin air behind closed doors for the benefit of special interests must be brought to an end. There should be no bailouts of corporations and no corporate subsidies. Corporations should be aggressively prosecuted for crimes and fraud. That is the basic statement that brings us together. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about the process. I've come to the conclusion, after having spent many years in politics, that presidential elections turn out to be more of a charade than anything else. And I think that is true today. It is a charade. And the endless discussion that goes on, this time longer than ever, for practically 2 years, and all the talk about things that aren't unimportant. They don't talk about the issues that we have just talked about here. And it seems to be like a collusion of ideas and 2 parties and the media. It just goes on, and you just think about all this talk on television, pretending there's this great difference. And really, when you look at it, there is no difference, because they don't address these subjects. We have other candidates that agree and disagree with the other two candidates. And the important thing here is who's the majority. There is no doubt in my mind that the majority is on our side. We represent the majority of the American people. The majority of the American people, even the recent polling shows that 60% of the American people are unhappy with their choices. If you take the total number of Americans and the percentage that register, then the percentage that vote, and then the percentage that vote for a candidate, we end up electing a president with 32% of the American people. And because they have been more or less conditioned to believe, well, the two candidates are different and we have to vote for the lesser of two evils, they end up voting, half the people who vote for the president are voting for the lesser of two evils. And so therefore, 16% of the American people essentially are saying, hey, I like this candidate, and they vote for the president. You know, yesterday, I had a phone call, the first phone call that I personally received or had received from anybody in the McCain candidacy in his campaign. They called, and it was a bit of a surprise to me, because their request was that I endorse John McCain today. And I said, well, I don't like the idea of getting about 2 or 3 million people angry at me. So, but they were serious, and it was a respectful call. And the argument was he would do a little less harm than the other candidate. And, you know, we just don't need to do that anymore. You know, in I believe it was 1988, and I believe Ralph Nader will remember this campaign, there was a debate going on with George Bush Sr. and Dukakis, and it was to be put on by the League of Women Voters. And there was a secret agreement between George Bush Sr. and Dukakis that they would dictate all the terms. That they would say who can come, and who the moderator is, and all this, and who had to be excluded. And when they presented these details to the League of Women Voters, they said, no way, they won't do it. And this was their statement. The demands of the two campaigns would perpetuate a fraud on the American voter. That's where we are. And then a few years later, an organization was formed, and it was called the Commission on Presidential Debates. And since that time, since they've been formed, they dictate all the rules. And guess who's chairman? Who they are? It's the former chairman, a former chairman of the Republican Party and a former chairman of the Democratic Party. And they dictate all the rules. So therefore, anybody who opposes the status quo aren't permitted to be in the debates. And that's where we are today. And this has to change, especially if you ever come around to the, please don't, if you ever get to the point where you believe the two parties are essentially the same, then if the majority is outside the establishment, that it's not very democratic. The process isn't working. And when you think about what we do around the world on the pretense of spreading democracy and how many people die, I think this is a tragedy. It's a tragedy that we who want to improve this country, defend our principles, defend the Constitution, and have a decent process are treated this way. And this is, in a way, an attempt on my part. I'm not a candidate. I'm still very interested in what's happening. And I just am today making a very strong suggestion of what we can do.